I'm not a doctor. I'm some dude. But at the end of the day, I also know how to read research and I also know how to practically apply it. And since I was super overweight before, and since I had very high cholesterol and high blood pressure before, I do speak from a little bit of my own experience. So take that for what it's worth, but let's look at some relatively new research surrounding how we might be able to modulate or possibly reduce some of the bad cholesterol if you're doing keto. Let's first come right out and say that when you are utilizing more fats for fuel, it's not uncommon to see a little bit of a change in your lipid profile. And I've talked about that to the moon and back, but the reality is we still need to be careful, okay? So let me first come right out and say, the main thing you want to watch when you're doing keto is your triglyceride levels. If your triglyceride levels are going really high, you may want to consider backing off how much fat you're consuming on a ketogenic diet. And I will go ahead right out and say, again, that it's not a huge deal to have lower amounts of fat and higher amounts of protein on keto and more veggies. Everyone seems to think that you need to load up on tons and tons and tons of fat. Okay, so anyhow, let's break it down. After this video, I do want you to check out my friends over at Thrive Market. If you're doing keto, you're doing intermittent fasting, and you're looking for better groceries, things that you like, things that you want to stock your pantry with that might be a little bit better for you, well, check them out. There's a link down below. So they're an online membership-based grocery store. They deliver groceries right to your doorstep. Super awesome, great options to choose from, and I've been using them for years, and they're also a big supporter of this channel, so I appreciate the heck out of them. And that link down below will save you 25% off of a membership as well as get you a free gift. So do check them out after this video if you just want to go grocery shopping without having to go to the grocery store. So check them out. First things first, and you're gonna hate me for this. If your cholesterol is high, you may want to just consider cutting down saturated fat a little bit. Not getting rid of it, but it's just, you have to remember how the body works. Okay, saturated fat, when it is in the bloodstream, it is going to make it so that for a temporary amount of time, the receptors, the LDL receptors in your liver are occupied. Okay, what that means is that for a little while after consumption of saturated fat, or if you're consuming a lot of it, you might find that, well, your LDL levels stay elevated, because they're never getting a chance to actually dock at the LDL receptor at the liver level. So what that means is you're going to see a higher level of LDL. That, I could talk about how that's not a big deal unless it's oxidized and yada yada, but the reality is for a lot of people, especially in America, if you're sedentary and if your diet isn't really clean, even on keto, that LDL can become oxidized. And if you're exposed to a lot of inflammatory stressors within the body and within life, then that absolutely, the longer that LDL is floating around in the system, the more likely it is to become oxidized. And we don't want that to happen. So, obviously ways around that, yeah, if you're going to consume more saturated fats, exercise as much as you can, not to burn off the saturated fats, but to get things mobilized and to get that process moving a little bit more. But I think one of the better things that you could do is saturated fat really shouldn't be making up more than, I would say on the high end, 30% of your fat calories. Okay, preferably a little bit lower. And it's not because too much saturated fat is bad. It's because what happens if you eat too much saturated fat is you take up the majority of your fat with saturated fat and you don't have enough room for the good fats, which I'm gonna get into some very interesting stuff right now. Activating PPAR, the fat adaptation nuclear receptor, is what we need to do. Okay, consuming a bunch of fats when you are not fat adapted is a recipe for disaster. That's why when you look at the standard American diet, they say it's high fat, so it's bad. They're not wrong. It is bad because it's high fat, but it's also high fat in conjunction with carbs. And the problem is that these people are not fat adapted at all because they're never giving their body a chance to run solely on these fats. So they're not fat adapted, okay? They're carb adapted, but they have fats added in. So the fats, therefore, do cause a problem. Okay, if you look at a study that was published in the journal Nature Medicine, it showed that activating PPAR, okay, the activation of the fat adaptation protein, okay, that activation led to the removal of cholesterol from what are called atherosclerotic foam cells. Okay, atherosclerotic foam cells are the macrophages, the white blood cells that are in our arteries that attract cholesterol and then form a foamy-like substance that can, yes, clog our arteries. And it's bad. It is a big problem. And I get a little bit tired of the ketogenic community like sweeping that under the rug, because it doesn't matter if you're keto or not. Like, being ketosis doesn't absolve you of your duties to take care of your vascular system and your circulatory system and your heart. So we just have to look at things a little bit differently. So how we activate PPAR is, of course, like I said, through like things like exercise. Fasted exercise gets you there ridiculously fast. And I'm not saying that this is like going to change everything for you. It might be that game changer that you need, but it's not going to fix everything. But the more that we can adapt to using fats, the better. Now, why did I lead off this whole saturated fat thing? Well, because when you have too much saturated fat, it prevents you from having monounsaturated fats and polyunsaturated fats, which are so critical for PPAR activation. We need that to get fat adapted. If you eat just a bunch of saturated fat, you don't activate PPAR as much. So less about the circulating LDL and more about the inability to consume the fats that actually are doing some really good stuff with fat adaptation, and ultimately the removal of the cholesterol from the atherosclerotic foam cells. There was a study published in the journal Advances in Nutrition. I talked about this in another video. It demonstrated that polyunsaturated fats from things like fish oil were by far the best activator of the nuclear receptor PPAR. I mean, we have to be having that activation. Not to mention, from a fat loss perspective, you want to be fat adapted. Like, it's absolutely what you want. It gives your body the machinery, the transport mechanisms, CD36, the fat translocation systems, all of that, the ability to activate so we can burn more fat. Then a brand spanking new 2021 BMC Sports Science Medicine Rehabilitation Journal, which I talked about in another video as well, demonstrated, and this is brand spanking new, that when subjects just consumed 2,000 milligrams of omega-3, didn't even take much, they ended up having 3x the activation of PPAR alpha compared to those that ate the same diet without the omega-3s. So if you sub out a lot of your saturated fat for polyunsaturated fat from fish, it can have that's no surprise, right? It applies whether you're keto, it applies whether you're standard American, it applies whether you're paleo. Like, it's the same thing. But monounsaturated fats, there is a tremendous body of research as things like olive oil and avocado oil as a ligand for PPAR alpha. A ligand is something that directly stimulates and affects this protein, right? So using olive oil with your cooking not only has a powerful effect at controlling and elevating your HDL cholesterol, but it also activates the PPAR alpha. So what do you want to do? Let me just give you straight up the fats you want to add in, what you want to sub out. Saturated fat, 20 to 30% of your overall makeup. It's okay to have it, just don't lean into only that. Otherwise, olive oil, good quality extra virgin olive oil can still be used for cooking. Avocado oil, tremendous monounsaturated fat, much better for cooking because it can handle high heat. Sesame oil, once it's toasted, just buy toasted sesame oil, and it has an antioxidant called sesamolin that gets activated that protects it and makes it a better omega-6 fat. Sparingly use amounts of flax oil. I'm okay with you adding it now and then, just don't make it like a huge part of your life. I would still rather you have the occasional amount of flax oil than having like just a ton of saturated fat all the time. Like, I love ghee, I love coconut oil, but I keep it in moderation, okay? So like 1 tablespoon of flaxseed oil maybe every other day. Obviously, fish oil. I would recommend between 2,000 and 5,000 milligrams, 2 to 5 grams of good quality krill, calamari, or just really good quality, northern cold Atlantic fish oil or salmon oil or something like that. Cod liver oil is also another one that you can use to get a good amount of docosahexaenoic acid, EPA, but also available like with the bioavailable retinol A. That's really good in it as well. One of my personal favorites, macadamia nut oil. Not as good for cooking because it changes flavor and it kind of burns, but it doesn't affect the actual oxidation. But it's such a low omega-6 profile, I would rather you like make your salad dressings and stuff with macadamia nut oil. Anyhow, that is going to give you a little bit of a breakdown. The more fat adapted you can get, the more that you can see your cholesterol drive down, okay? But remember, rule of thumb, if your triglycerides are high, back off the fats altogether. I'll see you tomorrow.